On June 22nd, 2024, a call comes into the 911 dispatch from the town of Grace Harbor, Maine. It is a coastal place where life flows peacefully, and the police more often deal with traffic violations or family disputes than with anything serious. This time, the call did not sound alarming. Neighbors complained about an unpleasant smell and a fan that had been humming non-stop for several days. They noted that the smell was strange, sweetish and nauseating, and it was coming specifically from the house on the corner. The complaint was recorded as irritating smell and technical noise. At first glance, nothing criminal. 2 days later, on June 24th, a patrol drove to the address. The house belonged to Thomas Ellaby, a local resident. The officers approached the door, rang the doorbell, knocked, and made an announcement through a loudspeaker. No one came out. They tried to call the phone number listed in the database. There was no answer. At that moment, the smell at the entrance was stronger than on the street. There was condensation on the windows, indicating high humidity inside. The fan continued to operate. The owner's car was parked near the house, but there were no signs of his presence. Neighbors confirmed the situation had not changed for the past few days. Such cases are classified as a welfare check. First, the police are obliged to rule out a medical emergency. For example, a person could have lost consciousness or died inside the house. Therefore, officers filed an emergency search warrant. The law allows this if there are sufficient grounds to believe that the owner is in danger. Here, there were several factors: a persistent smell, lack of contact, and signs of a closed premises. The judge issued the permit quickly. When the warrant was in hand, the police entered. They immediately opened the windows to air out the rooms and began their inspection. The first floors looked ordinary, furniture in place, no signs of forced entry or disorder. But the smell intensified as they approached the stairs leading downstairs. At the basement door, it became especially dense. A working fan was also there, clearly connected for continuous ventilation. Officers noted this in their report and shined a light into the depths of the room. Upon descending into the basement, they quickly located the source. In the utility area, next to shelves and technical equipment, were human remains. The count was not 1 or 2. In the end, the remains of 8 people were found in the basement. Thus, a routine complaint about a smell turned into the starting point of a major investigation. Thomas Ellaby's house was immediately sealed off as a crime scene, and an investigative team and forensic experts were called. And the owner himself, from that moment on, became the main suspect in the case. The house where the 8 bodies were found belonged to one person. The property documents for 417 Maple Avenue were registered in the name of Thomas Ellaby. He was 58 years old. In the small town, everyone knew it was his house. And now, this very fact transformed an ordinary, seemingly resident of Grace Harbor into the #1 figure for the investigation. Who was this man? Thomas Ellaby did not look like a person capable of being at the center of a horrifying case. He taught music at Harborside Middle School. His students knew him as a demanding but fair teacher who was always willing to stay after lessons to help with difficult parts. In the evenings, he could be found at St. Luke's Church, where he played the organ. For parishioners, he was part of the usual order. Every Sunday, Ellaby's music. His social status was above average. An educator, a musician, a man connected with the church. Ellaby was considered a respected resident of the town, a man trusted by parents, trusted by the school administration, trusted by the community. And herein lies the strongest contrast. Because it was in his house that 8 bodies were found. When experts began the examination, one of the first clarifications concerned the age of the deceased. Preliminary data showed all of them were teenagers. This was not a random assortment of people, not a disorderly picture. It was a group of victims of the same age, which immediately linked them to Ellaby's own world. He taught teenagers specifically. He worked with them in the choir, prepared them for competitions, rehearsals, and now, in his basement, the remains of those who were the same age as his students were found. From this moment on, the case ceased to be just a criminal mystery. It became a case about how a respected man, a trusted figure in the town, became linked to disappearances that had previously seemed unrelated. It was here that the investigation got a new starting point. It was necessary to check every step of Thomas Ellaby and understand how he found himself at the center of a story that shocked the entire town. After the discovery in the basement, the police had to understand if there was a documented link between Thomas Ellaby and the deceased. To do this, investigators reviewed all missing persons cases in the district for the past year. The work was routine, checking dates, names, circumstances. But the result was unexpectedly direct. All 8 people whose remains were found in the house were already listed as missing. And all of them were members of the school choir led by Ellaby himself. Now it was necessary to determine where this chain began. Investigators compiled a chronology. The first point, September 7th, 2023. Ellaby officially announced an additional program for talented vocalists. Rehearsals, preparation for the regional competition, individual lessons. Parents perceived this as an opportunity for their children to excel. No one saw anything suspicious in this. A month later, on October 19th, 2023, the first teenager did not return home. Initially, the police assumed a runaway. The family spoke of conflict, and the case did not stand out among others. But in subsequent months, disappearances began to repeat. At intervals of several weeks, the town lost another choir member. The last case was recorded on June 6, 2024. In total, 8 people disappeared over 9 months. When all these episodes were put together, it became clear. They formed a single pattern. The common denominator was too obvious to leave any doubt. Each disappearance occurred on the day or immediately after the teenager attended a rehearsal with Ellaby. The choir schedule and the dates of the missing person reports almost completely matched. Thus, the investigation established a hard fact. Over 9 months, 8 students from one choir disappeared. All of them were listed in the database as missing, and all of them ended up in the basement of their music teacher. This became a key point from which a full-fledged investigation into Thomas Ellaby's activities began. After the investigation established a connection between Ellaby and the disappeared students, the next step remained: to find material evidence. The bodies in the basement were themselves terrifying proof, but the police needed more. Items that showed exactly how this person acted and what connected him to the victims in everyday life. The search of the house continued for several days. Each room was photographed and video recorded, and items were inspected according to protocol. Special attention was drawn to the attic. Usually this place stores old boxes, clutter that is not needed in everyday life. But it was there that investigators went up to check if there was anything unusual. And indeed, among the dust and wooden beams, they discovered several tightly closed boxes. From the outside, they looked mundane. No markings, no signatures. But each of them was neatly folded and taped shut. What was inside? The boxes were opened one by one, and it immediately became clear. These were not Thomas Ellaby's personal belongings. Inside were school notebooks, diaries, and textbooks with signatures. Some had bookmarks, others notes in the margins. These belonged to teenagers. The items were arranged as if they had been deliberately collected. This was not a random assortment, but an entire collection. Experts conducted a comparison. Handwriting, signatures, dates, drawings, everything matched. These items belonged to the 8 missing persons. For the investigation, This became the first direct confirmation that not only they themselves but also their personal belongings were in Ellaby's house. This meant that the connection between the teacher and the disappearances became even stronger. But among the findings in the attic, one item stood out. In a stack of notebooks was an envelope with printouts of Harborside Middle Choir schedules. These were official documents that Ellaby used to plan classes. And it was on these sheets that handwritten marks were made. Opposite the names of the 8 teenagers were special marks, dates, circles, check marks. These papers were not just part of the learning process. They became evidence because they showed a choice. For the investigation, this became a turning point. It was now proven the disappearances were not accidental. Each of them was pre-linked to choir rehearsals, and Ellaby himself noted this in the documents. These lists became the first material evidence indicating the premeditation of his actions. From this moment, the investigation shifted. Now the police were looking not only for evidence inside the house, but also began to gather all possible information about how Ellaby prepared his actions, with whom he communicated, and what steps he took outside his home. After the discovery of evidence in Thomas Ellaby's house, the question of his status with law enforcement was no longer an issue. Before that, he was listed as a witness and the owner of the house where the discovery was made. But on June 24th, 2024, the situation changed dramatically. Based on the discovered bodies, the personal belongings of the missing teenagers, and the schedules with markings, the court issued a warrant for his arrest. This was the moment when Ellaby officially transformed from a respected teacher and organist into the main suspect in the case of the disappearances and deaths of 8 people. His detention went smoothly. Ellaby was arrested in his own home, where the search continued. Police presented the warrant, and he did not resist. Everything took place under cameras, so that the process had full legal force. He was informed of his rights, taken to the county precinct, where the protocol for the first interrogation was already being prepared. From this moment on, he was in isolation, and the house on Maple Avenue was completely sealed and handed over to forensic experts. Next, the investigation's attention shifted to his reaction. The first thing they wanted to record was his position on the found bodies. In the interrogation room, in the presence of a court-appointed lawyer, Ellaby was presented with a list of charges and asked a direct question. How did the remains of 8 teenagers end up in the basement of his house? According to the protocol, his answer was extremely brief. Ellaby refused to explain what happened, stated that an error had occurred and that he had no connection to the discovery. He then exercised his right not to testify against himself and demanded a lawyer for all subsequent procedures. Such behavior became a barrier for the investigation. No information from the suspect was forthcoming that could clarify his version of events. He did not deny ownership of the house, but refused to answer questions about the found items and bodies. For investigators, this meant one thing. The defense strategy was based on complete silence. In a legal sense, refusal to cooperate, coupled with the gravity of the presented evidence, sharply limited his options. The court considered the issue of pretrial detention. Given that it concerned 8 deceased persons found in a house belonging to Ellaby, and considering the schedules found in the attic, he had no chance of being released on bail. The judge ruled to keep him in custody without the right to bail. Thus, the respected townsman, well-known educator and musician, finally found himself in the status of the main suspect. This became a point of no return. Now the investigation ceased to be a search for possible connections and transformed into the preparation of an evidentiary base that was to answer the main question: how Ellaby was able to organize a series of disappearances and hide all of it for almost a year. The investigation already had strong evidence against Thomas Ellaby, but by law, one cannot be limited to a single version. Any high-profile case requires checking alternative scenarios to rule out errors. The question was Ellaby truly the only possible culprit, or could another force be behind the disappearances? Following standard procedure, investigators broadened the scope of their inquiry. They began by interviewing witnesses near the school where the teacher led the choir. They reviewed all reports received by the police in recent months. They compared observations from local residents and checked the travel routes of the missing teenagers. And quite quickly, 3 new leads emerged that did not fit into the simple teacher and his students narrative. The first lead came from witness testimonies. Several people claimed to have repeatedly seen a grey van without county license plates near the school building. The vehicle appeared in the evening after choir rehearsals ended and left a few minutes later. At the time, it was not considered suspicious, but now this detail looked different. The second lead concerned one of the families. One of the victims had a stepfather who openly conflicted with the school administration. The reasons cited were disciplinary measures, complaints, and disputes about how teachers treated the child. Records of his aggressive behavior at school meetings were preserved in the materials. For the investigation, this appeared to be a possible motive for revenge or coercion. The third lead was related to Ellaby himself, but not directly to his work. During the review of financial documents, investigators discovered strange transfers to his account. The amounts were larger than a teacher's usual salary. It was unclear where this money came from or what it was spent on. This point did not prove his innocence, but created a new mystery. Perhaps not only personal motives were behind what happened. Thus, the investigation had 3 different directions. The theory of an unknown predator with a grey van, the theory of a conflict within one of the victims' families, and the theory of Ellaby's financial secrets. Each direction required verification, interrogations, analysis of alibis, and the search for confirmation. The story ceased to be linear. If before it looked like an obvious teacher and his students scheme, now the investigation found itself in a situation where it had to unravel a whole tangle. Each lead opened a new line of events, and this meant that the investigation was entering its second act. A true labyrinth where investigators already had several potential suspects and no definitive answers. The first question that arose for investigators after Ellaby's arrest was simple. Did anyone notice any strange behavior from him in the months when the teenagers disappeared? To answer this, the police decided to analyze his routine life. Not only his work at school and church, but also his everyday purchases and financial trails. Such an analysis often reveals what escapes the notice of neighbors and colleagues. Soon, attention was drawn to receipts from the Harbor hardware store. In recent months, Ellaby had been making regular purchases there. At first glance, there is nothing suspicious about this. Every homeowner buys something for repairs and upkeep. But when officers compiled all transactions into a single timeline, it became obvious. The assortment of goods did not match the lifestyle of a music teacher and organist. These purchases were more fitting for someone trying to control a space, isolate it, and hide certain traces. What exactly was he buying? The lists included industrial fans, soundproofing panels, bags of lime, and large airtight containers. Each item individually might seem mundane. A fan, to air out the house. Panels, to improve acoustics. Lime, for household needs. Containers, for storage. But together, these purchases looked like a set used to conceal odors, noise, and biological traces. And this is what worried investigators most of all. When police correlated the dates of purchases with neighbor complaints, the puzzle came together. In the spring of 2024, residents of the street began to notice a constant fan noise coming from Ellaby's house. This period precisely coincided with the dates of his major purchases at Harbor Hardware. People said the sound came from the basement, running continuously without breaks at night. For the police, this was direct confirmation. The ventilation about which neighbors complained was installed after these purchases, and its purpose was not related to repairs, but to an attempt to conceal the consequences of crimes. Thus, the investigation received another piece of evidence. Ellaby's behavior documented not in words but in receipts and neighbor testimonies, showed intent. He did not accidentally keep bodies in the basement. He systematically prepared to hide traces and minimize external attention. This data strengthened the prosecution's position and further led the investigation into how thoroughly he planned his actions. To prove Ellaby's involvement, investigators needed to answer the main question: how did the victims end up in his house? The found belongings and neighbor testimonies alone were not enough. Objective data that left no room for doubt was needed. Police began collecting digital traces. First, surveillance camera footage from all over Maple Avenue was seized. Everything was used: city cameras, dashcam footage, and neighbors' doorbell cameras. The devices recorded not only the street but also passers-by themselves. It was in these archives that what the investigation was looking for was found. The cameras captured the last minutes of the victims' lives, and now investigators had the opportunity to reconstruct the chain of events step by step. What did the recordings show? On different dates, the same scene was observed. Thomas Ellaby walking down the street with one of the teenagers. They are talking calmly, without signs of coercion. Both turn towards his house, and the recording ends there. There were 8 such episodes, exactly the number of missing persons. This was key evidence. No outsider lured the children. No one waited for them near the school. Each time, Ellaby himself brought them to his home. To rule out any doubts, police also checked other digital traces. Cellular operator data was retrieved. Analysis of phone signals showed the same pattern. The devices of all 8 teenagers stopped signaling exactly when they were in the vicinity of Ellaby's house. Geolocation ceased at one address, 417 Maple Avenue. Thus, video recordings and mobile network data coincided. Cameras showed that Ellaby personally escorted the teenagers, and phone data confirmed that it was at his house that they lost contact with the outside world. This evidence worked like a vice. It trapped the victims and the suspect in the same place and at the same time. From this moment on, the theory of accidental disappearances finally collapsed, and the investigation focused on finding out how Ellaby planned and concealed his actions. To understand exactly what happened to the teenagers after they entered Ellaby's house, the investigation relied on data from forensic experts. Without precise medical conclusions, it would remain mere speculation. On July 10th, 2024, the forensic medical examination report was ready. The document became one of the most important in the case. It unified all 8 cases into a single scheme and confirmed the cause of death for all victims was the same. Experts described the mechanism in detail. Traces of potent sedative drugs were found in tissue samples. This meant that the teenagers were first rendered unconscious. But that was not all. In almost all cases, there were signs of asphyxiation. The medical formulation indicated strangulation. That is, it was not spontaneous anger, but a clear and methodical scenario. First, control over the victim through drugs. Then, the final act. Such a 2-stage method indicated calculation. This was not a random outburst of emotion, not chaotic violence. Ellaby acted coldly, choosing a sequence of steps to rule out resistance. Experts concluded all 8 teenagers died according to the same pattern. This once again confirmed the serial nature of the crimes and showed that it involved planning, not isolated incidents. The next stage involved searching for biological traces that could definitively link the victims to Ellaby's house and car. On July 29th, 2024, DNA analysis was completed. Materials for analysis were taken from the basement, from boxes in the attic, from furniture, and from the car interior. The laboratory compared the profiles with the database and official samples provided by the families of the missing persons. The results were unambiguous. DNA profiles of all 8 victims were found in the house. Traces were preserved on the walls and floor of the basement, on personal belongings found in the attic, and also in the trunk of Ellaby's car. This meant that the teenagers were not only inside his house, but also transported by him personally. Thus, the expertise put the final dot in the chain of evidence. The cause of death is identical. The mechanism confirmed. DNA linked the victims, the location, and the suspect into a single system. Science completely confirmed what was previously only an investigative theory. Now the prosecution had not only motive and circumstantial evidence, but also direct scientific proof. All of this became the foundation for preparing for the court process, where it remained to be seen whether this evidentiary base would withstand the pressure of the defense. After a series of loud statements and press publications, attention to the Ella-BEE case remained high. But within the investigation itself, it was necessary to deal not only with the main evidence, but also with the collateral versions that appeared at an early stage. Let's remember, 3 additional lines were in the police's field of vision. This is the grey van spotted near the school. This is the conflicting stepfather of one of the missing persons. And these are suspicious financial transfers that allegedly could indicate someone's secret agreements. Investigators were obliged to check each of these versions. It is impossible to ignore such data. Any misstep can lead to the collapse of the case in court. Therefore, the work proceeded methodically. Witnesses were interviewed, documents were collected, and digital traces were seized for each line. This took several weeks, and in the end, each of these versions received its explanation. First, the grey van. Several schoolchildren and 2 parents claimed to have seen it late in the evenings near Harborside Middle. It turned out that the vehicle belonged to an air conditioner installer who worked in a neighboring building. A GPS tracker on his car confirmed the routes. On the dates when the teenagers disappeared, the van was indeed near the school, but the time coincided with his work orders. Order documents and client testimonies fully confirmed the alibi. The second version concerned the stepfather of one of the victims. His conflicts with the school were real and recorded in parent-teacher meeting minutes. However, a detailed check revealed that on the day of his stepdaughter's disappearance, he was at work outside the city. Timesheets, production cameras, and colleague testimonies confirmed his presence on the shift. This alibi left no room for doubt. The third line looked the most vague. Financial transfers to Ella-BEE's account. Initially, they aroused suspicion. The amounts were higher than his usual income. But when the documents were fully retrieved, it turned out that these were payments from a church fund. Ella-BEE bought a new organ for St. Luke's Church, and the payments were made under an installment agreement. The church's accounting department retained the original documents and confirmations of these transactions. Thus, the money had no relation to the disappearances and was explained by his professional activity. The outcome of these checks was the only possible one. All collateral lines ran into an impenetrable alibi or received a logical explanation. The grey van turned out to be a work vehicle. The stepfather was on shift on the day of the disappearance, and the strange payments turned out to be installments for a musical instrument. Formally, all these versions were closed by the investigator's decree. This meant that the labyrinth of the investigation gradually narrowed. Now attention fully returned to Thomas Ella-BEE. He remained the sole suspect, and the collected evidence formed a coherent and consistent picture. It was from this moment that the investigation finally focused on preparing the indictment that had to stand up in court. If the investigation already had all the evidence against Thomas Ella-BEE, the main question remained: why? If money, revenge, or someone's orders were excluded, what could have driven a respected schoolteacher and organist to a series of meticulously prepared murders? To answer this, investigators looked into his health and psyche. Ella-BEE's medical records were requested, and a forensic psychiatric examination was ordered. The study of medical documents revealed a number of problems. Ella-BEE suffered from progressive hearing loss, accompanied by tinnitus. a constant ringing in his ears. For a musician and teacher, this was not just an inconvenience, but a catastrophe. Doctors noted that his hearing had sharply deteriorated in recent years. In conjunction with this, psychiatrists identified an adjustment disorder in him. He could not come to terms with the changes in his life. Narcissistic personality traits were added, a desire to control others and a painful attitude toward his own status. The examination brought all this together into a single picture. LBEE perceived hearing loss as the end of his identity. Music and the clear children's voices with which he worked became an obsession for him. According to the expert's conclusion, the motive was formed in pathological logic. He wanted to preserve the voices of his students in the form in which they sounded to him then, while his hearing still allowed him to perceive them, and before they changed with age. From the perspective of a normal person, this sounds like a perverted justification. But for him, it became a fixed idea, justifying what he was doing. At the same time, there was also the main legal question. Did he realize what he was doing? Was he able to be responsible for his actions? These questions were to be answered by the forensic psychiatric examination. Despite the diagnoses made, doctors came to an unambiguous conclusion. Thomas LBEE understood the nature of his actions and could control himself. That is, he remained sane at the time of each crime. Thus, experts confirmed, this is not about a random breakdown or madness, but about a consistent, pathologically motivated but still conscious activity. This conclusion was decisive. Now the prosecution had not only evidence but also an official conclusion about his sanity. This meant that a trial was ahead, and LBEE would face it as a person fully capable of being responsible for his actions. The final interrogation of Thomas LBEE became a key moment of the entire investigation. By this time, the investigation had a complete evidentiary base: witness testimonies, digital traces, examination results, found items, and medical conclusions. The question now was not whether there was enough evidence, but how the suspect himself would behave when all this was presented to him personally. The formal reason for the meeting was obvious. Before handing the case over to the court, investigators had to conduct a final interrogation, solidifying it with a protocol. This time they decided to go all the way, to present every piece of evidence, every proof, to see LBEE's reaction. This was a moment of direct confrontation. A man considered a respected teacher and organist for the first time found himself face to face with the picture built against him. The interrogation took place in a specially equipped room where video recording was conducted. Photographs from surveillance cameras showing him accompanying the teenagers to his home were placed on the table in front of LBEE. Then followed printouts of phone data confirming that their phones stopped working at his address. The investigator showed receipts from the Harbor hardware store, where he bought industrial fans, bags of lime, and containers. Next, expert reports were demonstrated. DNA profiles found in the basement and in the car matched the profiles of all 8 victims. To increase the pressure, the investigator read excerpts from letters LBEE wrote to parents, inviting their children to additional choir classes. These documents, once seemingly harmless, now became part of the evidence. IT log data was also added. His queries about medical preparations and means for insulating premises were recorded. Each piece of evidence was layered on top of another, like bricks of a wall that was slowly but inexorably closing around him. All these materials were presented sequentially, and LBEE's reaction was one that no one expected. The interrogation protocol recorded his silence. He did not argue, did not deny, did not attempt to justify himself. There were no emotions, no outbursts of anger, no tears. Complete indifference. Investigators said that this silence sounded louder than any words. It emphasized his detachment and stubborn unwillingness to acknowledge the obvious. At the end of the interrogation, the investigator made a final attempt. He asked a direct question, which sounded like a challenge. "Why did you do it, Thomas?" A pause fell in the room. Ella B. looked up, stared directly at the investigator, and uttered one short phrase. "I will only speak in court." These words became the summation of the entire investigation. There was no confession, no explanation. He remained silent until the end, leaving the final answers for the courtroom. And it was there that the center of events now shifted to the process that was to put the final period in the case of Thomas Ella-B-E. When the investigation had gathered all the evidence, it seemed that the picture of the crimes was already fully constructed. But the prosecution understood. For the court, a strong argument was needed that would destroy any attempts by the defense to refer to accident or a mental breakdown. Such an argument appeared during the analysis of Thomas Ella-B-E's laptop, seized during the search. Digital forensic experts spent weeks studying the hard drive. They checked every folder, every temporary file. The first thing they found was letters to parents offering additional choir rehearsals. These letters had been part of the evidence from the very beginning. But much more important was that drafts were preserved in the computer's memory. They turned out to be key. Visually, the drafts differed little from the final letters, but metadata analysis revealed details that could not be ignored. The file creation date coincided not with the sending date, but with the months preceding the disappearances. For example, a letter for a teenager who disappeared in May 2024 was created back in January. Other drafts had similar discrepancies. Letters that parents received in the spring turned out to have been written back in winter. This detail changed everything. If earlier the defense could have tried to argue that Ella-B-E acted impulsively, that each disappearance was the result of a sudden breakdown, now this version became impossible. The draft showed he chose in advance whom he would write to, thought through the text, and kept the letters for months until the right moment came. These were not spontaneous actions. This was preparation. The legal significance of this discovery was enormous. The presence of such documents destroyed all attempts by the defense to speak of affect or unintentionality. It pointed to clear, cold planning and the selection of victims long before the events themselves. For the prosecution, this became a coup de grâce, evidence that left no doubt about premeditation. Now the case was qualified as first-degree murder with premeditation. This element made the accusation not just solid, but practically ironclad. And it was with this evidence that the prosecution went to court, ready to show that Thomas Ella-B-E not only committed crimes but also methodically planned them long before the teenagers crossed the threshold of his home. In court, Thomas Ella-B-E finally had the opportunity to fulfill the promise he made during his last interrogation. He was called to the courtroom, given the floor, and everyone held their breath. But, contrary to expectations, he chose silence again. Ella-B-E refused to testify, citing his right not to incriminate himself. For many, this confirmed that a confession from him would never come. But the process did not stop there. The trial continued, and the climax occurred not in his words, but in the work of the prosecution. Prosecutors methodically presented everything the investigation had accumulated. First, the jury was shown camera recordings. The very scenes where Ella-B-E walked alongside each teenager, leading them to his home, appeared on the screen. Then, mobile operator data was shown, demonstrating how the phones stopped signaling precisely at his address. Next came the results of the examinations. Forensic medical experts read out the conclusions about the cause of death. Criminalistics experts presented DNA evidence found in Ella-B-E's basement and car. Digital specialists spoke about the drafts of letters created months before the disappearances, showing premeditated intent. All this was accompanied by documents, photographs, tables. Every detail was in its place. The prosecutor intensified the effect by reading excerpts from Ella-B-E's letters to parents, where he promised to help children unleash their vocal talents. These words now sounded like cynical deception, behind which lay a deadly trap. Concluding the chain of evidence, the prosecution added the psychiatrist's conclusion. Despite hearing problems and a mental disorder, Ella-Bee remained sane and understood his actions. The culmination was the prosecutor's closing argument. He did not call Ella-Bee a monster or resort to loud emotional words. He emphasized the main point. This was a methodical man who used the trust of children, parents, and the entire city to realize his obsessive idea. He lived a double life, publicly a respected teacher and musician, in private reality, a man who kept bodies in his own home. For the jury, this speech was the final point. In their eyes, Ella-Bee ceased to be a strange teacher or a person with health problems. Before them appeared a calculating killer, coldly using the trust given to him. From this moment on, the court had no doubt what the verdict should be. In the courtroom, the moment arrived when prosecutors presented the most terrifying part of the case, the reconstruction of the crimes. It was important for the jury not only to see the evidence individually, but also to understand how each episode unfolded from beginning to end. And the prosecution demonstrated this was not random chaos, but a practiced procedure, repeated again and again. The reconstruction was based on a combination of data, letters and their drafts, digital traces, witness testimonies, examinations. All this formed a single scheme that demonstrated that each disappearance followed the same algorithm. This was the main horror. Everything was reduced to routine repeatability, like on a conveyor belt. First, the investigation showed the preparatory stage. Ella-Bee selected the future victim in advance and drafted a letter for the parents. These drafts indicated dates and pretexts for additional rehearsals. The letter was later sent at a convenient moment. Parents saw it as a regular offer for a lesson and agreed. Next came the next step, a meeting after school. Ella-Bee accompanied the student on a walk through the park, which was recorded by surveillance cameras and witnesses. This walk was a key moment. This is how the teenager ended up with him outside of school, in a neutral setting, and calmly walked to his home. Entry into the house and subsequent disappearance were recorded by phone data and digital traces. Then the reconstruction moved to the basement. The second stage began there. The murder. Experts confirmed that sedative drugs were initially used. The teenager lost consciousness and stopped resisting. After this, the final step followed. Strangulation, which was recorded as the direct cause of death in all 8 cases. The final stage, concealment. The basement was equipped in advance. False walls, ventilation, containers. It was there that he placed the bodies, using lime to slow decomposition and fans to divert the smell. All this was confirmed by purchases at the hardware store and neighbors' testimonies about constant noise. The main conclusion of the reconstruction was obvious. There was no spontaneity or chaos in Ella-Bee's actions. Every step was planned, every detail thought out. From the choice of victim to the concealment of the body, and everything was subject to a cold, methodical scenario. And this is what cemented his image in the eyes of the jury. Not a person in a state of affect, not a madman, but a calculating killer who consciously pursued his goal and did everything to cover his tracks. This reconstruction became a bridge to the next stage of the process, the jury's discussion of the verdict, which was to determine his fate. On May 9th, 2025, the trial reached its final stage. After the closing arguments of the prosecutor and the defense attorney, the jury retired to the deliberation room. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Everyone understood that a decision was close, but no one knew how long it would take to reach it. Usually in such cases, deliberations can drag on for hours or even days. But this time, everything was different. The jury returned in less than 2 hours. Such a short period meant one thing. There was practically no doubt in their decision. When they returned to the courtroom, complete silence fell. The foreperson of the jury stood up, handed the verdict sheet to the judge, and he began to read it aloud. The verdict was clear and unambiguous. Guilty. Ella Bee was found guilty on all 8 counts of first-degree murder. Each disappearance, each death was recognized as a planned act. The courtroom listened in silence. No one was surprised, but the moment itself made a strong impression. Months of investigation and trial concluded with the legal recognition of his guilt. The next step was sentencing. The judge, relying on the jury's verdict, read out the final decision. Thomas Ellaby was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This meant that he would spend the rest of his life in prison, with no chance of ever being released. Thus, the story that began with a complaint about a smell and a fan's noise ended in a courtroom. The verdict closed the criminal case, but for the town and the families of the deceased, this story would long remain an unhealing wound. After the verdict was announced, one more important question remained: what to do with the house on Maple Avenue, where all the terrible events took place. This address instantly became a symbol, and not in a good way. Curious people began to visit the house, rumors appeared, and even attempts to organize gloomy excursions. For the victims' relatives and the entire town, this became additional pain. The municipality, together with the families of the deceased, decided that the house should not continue to exist as a reminder of evil. And soon after the trial concluded, the building was demolished. This decision was perceived not as an act of destruction, but as an attempt to cleanse the town of the shadow that had fallen upon it. There are no longer walls, no basement, no traces at the crime scene. An empty space remained there, but destroying the bad is only half the battle. It was important to create something new that would preserve the memory of the victims. The initiative came from the town's residents. People raised funds, and the school district, church, and local entrepreneurs joined the project. The result was the creation of a memorial in Seaglass Park, the very park through which Ellaby led the children to his house. Now, a memorial composition with the names of the 8 deceased is installed there. This place has become a point of memory, where families, students, and residents come to lay flowers and pay tribute. The Ellaby case changed the system itself. The school district completely revised safety rules. Now, individual lessons and extracurricular rehearsals are strictly regulated. Parents are required to sign consent for each visit, and meetings take place only on school grounds and only with open doors. These measures were a direct result of the tragedy, but the main consequences were intangible. Grace Harbor, where an atmosphere of trust once reigned, where people knew each other by name and left doors open, lost that feeling. The illusion of safety disappeared. The town continued to live, but the scars of this story remained forever. Everything began on October 15th, 2018. At 7:12 in the morning, a call came into the 911 emergency center of the small town of Port Blossom. For the dispatcher who took the call, it was an everyday morning incident. A worried mother, Anna Vance, reported that her 17-year-old daughter Elara had not come home. The day before, she had gone to a school party and had not been heard from since. In the system, the case received the routine note: potential juvenile runaway. Similar incidents occurred regularly, and at that moment, no one could have guessed what turn the story would take. Following standard protocol, a patrol car was dispatched to the Vance family's address. The officer's task was simple: interview the mother and record the details. But what he saw in Elara's room immediately refuted the simplest and most obvious version. Her wallet lay on the table containing cash and bank cards. Her passport was in the drawer, and by the door stood her packed backpack. with which she was supposed to go to school that morning. A teenager who decides to run away from home takes precisely these things first. The conclusion was obvious. Ilara had not run away. She had intended to return home. At that very moment, the status of the case changed and it was handed over to the investigative department. Their work began at the only logical place where Ilara had last been seen, at that school party. To move from the room to the party guest lists, the normal world first had to be established. The background against which Ilara's disappearance no longer looked like a deviation from routine, but became an event that broke out of the usual pattern. This background is simple. A small coastal town, a school, a clear schedule, and understandable roles. Port Blossom is a quiet hub on the coast of British Columbia. The population, 4,985 people according to the city register. One street with a post office, a pier with fishing boats, a single police station where one knows the names of the duty officers from the signs on the door. The year's crime statistics recorded a minimum of serious incidents, mainly petty thefts and domestic conflicts. For the locals, this is a place where one hears the creaking of mooring lines in the morning, where children walk to school, and where strangers immediately stand out. Safety is not a topic of discussion here. It is integrated into everyday life, like the bus schedule to the neighboring town. Port Blossom High is the only secondary school with 312 students. Small classes, a gym where jerseys are dried on radiators in winter, and a bulletin board with club names. Here, each student's role can easily be described in 2 lines. Ilara Vance, graduating student, 12th grade, grade point average, 4.0 according to internal assessment. Captain of the volleyball team, member of the student council, responsible for the training schedule and registration for the district tournament. This is not an idealization, but facts from the class register and her list of achievements that can be verified. Her name in game protocols, in council meeting minutes, in volunteer lists for the city run. Her social circle is short and predictable for a small town. Chloe Davis, a classmate, constant partner in school projects, and Leo's girlfriend, Leo Gray, a student from the parallel class, plays basketball, often drives friends home after practice. Marcus Peterson, quiet, one of those who sticks with the strong, helps with equipment at events. These 3 are the closest contacts whose names would come up again and again during the investigation, not due to rumors, but because they were objectively part of her school life. Another detail to note. 2 weeks before the disappearance, the relationship with Caleb Reed ended. The breakup is clearly traceable through data, status changes on social networks, the disappearance of joint photos from the last weekend. Ilara appeared at practice without him. This is not a drama, just a change important for the chronology. In Ilara's normal world, almost everything is based on a schedule. Classes in the morning, the afternoon block for training, evenings preparing for the tournament and rehearsals for the school play. Free time slots are rarely unused. Volunteer meetings, submitting drafts, preparing for a test. Her home is in the center. The walk to school takes 15 minutes. On the door, a hook for the gym ID, on the table a printed game schedule with dates highlighted with a marker. This is a case where the habit of planning is visible to the naked eye and confirmed by the people around her, by the coach, by the homeroom teacher, by classmates. The idealized facade of the town and the school is not important in itself. It is necessary to understand how quickly and sharply a deviation stands out. In an environment where almost everything is visible, not coming home overnight is not a common story, but a disruption in the system of repetitive actions. That is why, after the morning inspection, the room was no longer just a bedroom, but a control point. The next logical step was to investigate where and how this normal world ended on Sunday. Weekends in Port Blossom follow a familiar scenario. Games during the day, private gatherings in the evening. On Sunday, October 14th, The graduating class had a school party at a private home, approved by the administration on the condition that the host's parents were present in the next room. The format was typical for the town. Music no louder than agreed, a table with pizza, photos by the fireplace, departure, in groups so as not to wander alone. For a minority, an occasion to test boundaries. For the majority, simply a meeting place to talk about the tournament and autumn plans. The objective components of the evening are easy to enumerate. The organizer was a classmate. The house was on the south side, a 10-minute walk from the school. The guest list included the upper classes, around 36 people. Some came for an hour, others stayed longer. The playlist was the school's. Photos show that the sports teams and their friends were mostly in the living room. Among those present were Chloe, Leo, and Marcus. Caleb did not appear that evening. His and Alara's stories in photos and in stories were already separate. These are not details from life, but anchor points by which the timeline and movement routes can be verified. For Alara, this evening would not have been different from others if Monday morning had started as usual. Normally after a party, sleep, alarm clock, backpack by the door, the walk to first period. This is precisely why her absence from school and the documents left at home so strongly shook the original version. The normal world had by this point been described, and in it, there was no place for a voluntary disappearance. Meanwhile, the town lived its own life. At the pier, boats were already being prepared for the morning outing. On the schoolyard, the first sports lessons were taking place. At the bakery, a line formed for coffee. No external signs of trouble, just timestamps and short entries in the journals that aligned into a straight line. In this line, that party became the last confirmed point. To conclude the ideal facade, a starting position remains to be established from which work with the chronology will begin. Alara Vance was last seen on October 14th at approximately 2300 hours at a classmate's house where the school party was held. This note becomes the starting point. From here, inquiries will be directed to those who were closer to the exit, who saw her at the coat check, who went in the same direction, and who offered to give her a ride. From now on, the story shifts from general information to concrete routes, conversations, and time windows from which the evening will be reconstructed gradually and completely. From the general information about the party, everything transitions to the last hours, to the time segment between 22:30 and midnight, in which every minute is enriched with different versions. From the outside, it looked simple. The graduating students left in groups, cars drove to the gates, the music got quieter. Inside, it was already not so clear. Two lines were expressed with equal certainty. She drove with friends, everything was quiet, and before that, there was a conversation in a louder tone. Between these two, a gap arose that required exact times and names, not retellings. Witnesses described the same evening differently but with recognizable nodes. Witness 1, a volleyball teammate. Around 10 to 11, Alara was talking to Leo by the pool, without shouting. They just stood aside, keeping a bit separate from the others. Witness 2, a classmate from the parallel class. Chloe and Alara were arguing by the kitchen. I didn't hear the words, but the gestures were sharp. 2 or 3 minutes. Then they were separated by friends. Witness 3, who was in charge of the music. I was monitoring the playlist and saw Leo show the keys around 11 and say, "Let's go, it's not far." I think he called Marcus. Witness 4, a teammate of Leo's. She drove with Leo, Chloe, and Marcus. Leo's car is a grey sedan, that's for sure. They came out as a foursome, got in, and drove off around 2305. Witness 5, a host's parent. I asked the youngsters to call taxis or drive with those who hadn't been drinking. Leo seemed sober, said he would take his friends home and come back. I saw Alara among those leaving. The chronology emerges from short notes, At 22:50, a conversation by the pool. At 22:55, a brief clash by the kitchen around 2300, gathering at the front door between 2305 and 2310. The grey sedan turns away from the house. Each detail depends on someone's memory and the lighting of the yard. Somewhere it was darker, somewhere louder, somewhere someone walked between the speakers. Hence the difference in the tone of the statements, for some quiet, for others tense. There are also small inconsistencies that intertwine. One guest is sure that Marcus, not Leo, was driving. Another says that Ilara called someone for a few seconds before leaving. A third claims to have heard the phrase, "We're just going for 5 minutes and coming back." All three describe the moment before the door closed differently, but essentially agree. There was no coercion and no attempts to hold her back. Ilara went to the exit herself, next to her 3 familiar faces. Against this background, one detail particularly stands out. No one saw Ilara take her outerwear from the coat rack. For mid-October, that's strange, but not impossible. It's only a few steps from the house to the car, and the yard is warm from the people and the light. This small detail is noted as indefinite, as the dispute about a jacket changes nothing about the main point. She left the house with her people, no strangers. When the statements are pieced together, the dispute over whether they argued or not recedes into the background. Something else is more important: the composition of the group and the car. Leo Gray's grey sedan appears in the statements of 4 of the 5 witnesses. The names of those who got in with Ilara are repeated without deviations: Leo, Chloe, Marcus. Thus, the minimal, undeniable part of the picture is formed. Everything else is nuances: whose voice was harsher, who looked away, who said 2 minutes. Around 2310, the timeline breaks off at the gates. After that, no one saw Ilara personally. No stories with her face after leaving. No photos in the parking lot. No one who would say, "We met her on the way." For a town where almost everyone knows everyone, this emptiness is immediately noticeable. The chain of witnesses ends abruptly where it would normally continue with messages like, "We've arrived." The scattered sentences from the first interviews: spoke with Leo, argued with Chloe, drove away with them in the grey sedan, form a framework to which camera recordings and digital traces will later be attached. But even at this stage, the most important fact is unambiguous. Ilara Vance voluntarily left the party in Leo Gray's car, accompanied by Chloe Davis and Marcus Peterson. After the moment of her departure, no one saw her again. From this point on, the work no longer revolves around the living room and the pool. The vector shifts to the street and time. Where could the grey sedan have turned after the gates? What will the cameras at the next intersection show, and which of the 3 will get tangled in the roots first? The next step is obvious: to check the car's path from the classmate's house to the next exits from the neighborhood, and to compare these minutes with what will later appear in the phones. It is precisely here that the exposition closes and the search for the path begins, on which the night abducted Ilara from her ordinary life. From the gates of the classmate's house, the route no longer led into darkness. It was no longer about the living room or the music, but about the yard, the driveway, and a short strip of grass over which the wheels rolled onto the street, one after another. Here, the investigation team and forensic scientists first met. The standard scheme: secure surroundings, photographic documentation, grid search along the line from the gate to the roadway. And almost immediately, something that changed the balance of power lay on the lawn at the edge of the exit. A thin rectangle in a mat cover, the only silent witness of that night. The phone is not turned on at the scene. First, the rules. Gloves, a marker, a scale ruler, an overall view and close-ups, how the case lies, where the cracked corner points, whether there are traces of sand or microdamage on the glass. Then the packaging, a paper envelope against moisture, over it an anti-static bag, a label with time, coordinates, and the signature of the officer taking custody. In such cases with digital data carriers, there is no hurry. It is more important to secure them than to look immediately. Next to it, the protocol notes 2 tire tracks and a short strip of flattened grass. The car had turned a little further right than usual. Identification takes only minutes. Based on the clip and the case, many at school recognize this device. Then formally, the IMEI matches the data provided by the parents. The SIM card belongs to Elara Vance's number. The glass has a spiderweb pattern in one corner, but the screen is intact. The battery is discharged to 0. In the lab, it is connected to a test station without putting it into operating mode, so as not to overwrite any service notes. Already on the charging screen, a list of several notifications appears. A missed call from her mother in the morning, an unread reply from the team chat, and most importantly, the last outgoing line, fully visible even without unlocking. In parallel, the area is inspected. From the gate to the driveway, there are several traces. A lost hair tie, a cup print on the concrete edge, numerous shoe prints that make no sense without comparison. The homeowner is led into the yard. He confirms. Yes, the exit was full. Cars were bumper to bumper. Leo's grey sedan was closest to the street. The headlights were turned on for a minute to pass each other. This detail explains why the phone might have ended up on the lawn. It slipped from her hand or pocket as she got into the front seat, and in the noise, no one heard the dull thud on the ground. Access to the content is legally secured. First, what is visible without unlocking is recorded. Time, icons, message previews. Then, an application for a full analysis of correspondence and logs is made to avoid later questions in court. But even before that, the crucial line is known. In the notification list, the last entry is an outgoing text addressed to Chloe Davis. Okay, let's meet at the quarry. We need to talk. The time, 2305. Later, after obtaining permission, forensics will read the exact timestamps. Sent via the home Wi-Fi, delivery confirmation occurred a few seconds later. A reply from Chloe came without text, just a dash and a sticker, then silence. The protocol contains a dozen more ordinary lines, but they are no longer significant. The most important one is this, because it is not about emotions, but about coordinates. The old quarry is not a figurative expression, but a concrete location on the northern edge of the town to which teenagers have been driving for years. It has a single road, a single turnoff from the coastal road, and a characteristic edge of red clay recognizable by the stains on sneakers. The phone with the cracked glass becomes not just a find, but an entry point. It immediately provides 3 clues. The departure time, around 2305, the composition of the group, the same 3 people, and the next location, the quarry. Within this triangle, everything else can already be built. Request cameras at intersections. Check if the reflective stripes of the sedan were captured turning north. Cross-reference the data with residents' routers along the route and with friends, accounts who were online at the same time. By the evening of the same day, the direction of the investigation is no longer vague. From where she could have been, only where exactly they were supposed to go remains. These are not theories or someone's retellings, but a line of text on a screen and a timestamp next to it. The inspection of the party location is complete. The premises are handed back to the family. The crucial item has been secured and sent for detailed analysis. The department has a clear route on the map, a short road north to a place where the entire upper school gathers in the evenings. The further algorithm is simple and inevitable. Secure the quarry, establish a perimeter, check the access roads and embankments, Ensure that the place remains untouched until the arrival of the forensic scientists. The next chapter will begin there, on the square that for many years was the territory of teenagers and now becomes the stage for the work of adults. But before the investigators drove to the quarry and put up caution tape, they concluded the simplest point. In such stories, it always appears first: the ex-boyfriend. The town was still discussing the grey sedan and the late departure, while in the department a familiar name was already being uttered: Caleb Reed. Their relationship had ended 2 weeks earlier. The reason? Jealousy. Short skirmishes after practice, irritability in messages. Nothing unusual for the graduating class, but enough to create a primitive picture in one's mind. Hurt, impulse, a meeting in the dark. For rumors, a convenient version. For the case, just a starting point. Caleb arrives with his parents. He is not defiant. He does not play the silent type. He simply says, that evening, he was not in town. A family dinner out, a large table. Congratulations for a relative. They had left as 12 people and returned late. He names the restaurant, the reservation time, asks to check the bills. In his tone, there is no boasting, rather tiredness from the questions he had already been asked at school. Further, it is not dramaturgy that works, but verifiable trifles. At the restaurant counter, there is indeed a reservation under their name. At the checkout, there are late bills for desserts and coffee. In photos from strangers' phones, a group picture with that long table. Caleb in a grey hoodie by the window. Above him, a TV with hockey is turning off. A camera in the parking lot films the family minivan rolling out of the parking lot around midnight. The license plate is legible, the weather clear. The relatives do not help each other with the times. Each names their own piece, and they fit together without stretching. The school adds a quiet detail. Caleb had not appeared at the party. He is not seen in stories or group photos. In messages with Ilara, there was silence that evening. The situation does not speak for the beautiful television version of "he came back and couldn't take it." Here, there is simply no room for maneuver. From the restaurant to Port Blossom is a half-hour drive each way, and dinner dragged on almost until closing. When all the pieces fall into place, a short phrase appears in the protocol, read without emotion. Caleb Reed is excluded from the circle of possible involved parties. Not out of mercy and not based on the family's words, but based on matching timestamps, the people at the table, and the cameras at the entrance. This step is important, not to relieve tension, but not to lose momentum. The most convenient path is blocked. What remains on the table is what cannot be blamed on a stranger from the past. 3 friends, Leo's grey sedan, and a short stretch of road north. The investigation does not deviate from here. It returns to where the night truly took a turn, to the group with whom Ilara voluntarily rode. The next move is extremely concrete. Their versions, their timings, and what the interior of the car will show, in which the last clear minute of this story ends. The investigation returned to those who had taken Ilara. The 3 were summoned one after another, without fanfare, without cameras, into ordinary small rooms with grey walls and a table on which lay an empty form and a glass of water. The stories heard there seemed carefully rehearsed. The words repeated almost verbatim, like in a practiced scene. We dropped her off at the end of her street. She said she wanted to walk a bit further. We went to Leo's, and each added the same assurance. We didn't go to the quarry. Leo Gray remained calm, answering briefly and confidently. He said he drove sober, took his friends to the center, stopped at Ilara's house for a minute. Didn't get too close. It's narrow there. Chloe Davis repeated the same route with the same words. We stopped at the end of the street. She asked to be dropped off to walk further. Marcus Peterson, the quietest, also did not deviate from the line. Dropped her off, turned around, went to Leo's to play. When asked about the quarry, all three uniformly shook their heads. No, that wouldn't have made sense. Too smooth for a night that had previously had plenty of inconsistencies. But a smooth story is not a crime. For now, it's just a feeling. And that counts for nothing without evidence. The evidence was to be the street. If their words were true, the grey sedan should have appeared in front of a lens at least once. The street where the Vance family lives is not hidden in the forest. It is a central district, a short, straight thoroughfare leading to an intersection with a shop on the corner. 2 streetlights always burn here. A camera hangs under the sign at the bakery, and a neighbor across the street has installed another on his garage. These cameras do not monitor people. They simply record the usual: rare cars, a cyclist on the late shift, a dog dragging its owner to an open field. On such nights, their recordings become an infallible metronome. The request is made quickly and calmly. No special operation is needed. Private recordings are standard. People in such towns understand what they are for. On the screen, a cold rectangle of the street and the ticking minutes in the corner. From 2300 to 2330, 3 cars pass: a white pickup, a delivery van, and a sedan with children's stickers on the window. A grey car similar to Leo's is not among them. From 2330 to midnight, 2 more passages: the neighbor's minivan and a taxi turning at the shop. That's it. No stop at the end of the street. No brief flashing of headlights from the direction where it is narrow. Emptiness where their route should have appeared. For completeness, the second camera is checked, the one on the garage opposite the Vance's house. The viewing angle captures precisely that end of the street to which the 3 had referred. A strip of asphalt, the shadow of a maple tree, a fence with white posts. The interval from 2300 to 1 o'clock in the morning passes without surprises. A rare passerby, a cat crosses the street. Around 012 a bicycle with a lamp passed by. No car, not once. And that's no longer a feeling. It is the naked, cold emptiness of the recording, in which, according to the youngsters, a brief brake light and the figure of a girl getting out of the car should have been seen. The versions of the 3 now seem like a copy transferred onto tracing paper. Leo says he only stopped for a second and didn't turn off the engine. The recording was analyzed second by second. This flash of brake lights should have landed in the lens, but it didn't. Chloe specifies that she doesn't remember the exact time. There's no need to rush. The camera's timeline leaves no room for ±10 minutes. Marcus tries to appease. Maybe we got the time wrong. But for a night without a sense of time, his formulations about the games afterward at Leo's are too precise. The unanimity, which just seemed neat, now becomes a crunch. Too smooth where the street ends in an empty recording. This discrepancy has simple consequences. If Alara was not dropped off at the end of her street, then the story afterward we went to Leo's must also be checked. The line, house, turn, PlayStation, breaks in 3 places simultaneously. Wrong drop-off point, absence of the car in the period in question, and the general tone of, "We're together, everything's fine with us," which in such cases always raises more alarm than scattered trifles. When 3 young people retell the night with the same sentences, it sounds not like memory but like collusion. Here, it is important to maintain momentum, not to throw accusations around, but to solidify what can be stated without "it seems." Fact 1. Their car did not drive into the street leading to the Vance's house between 2300 and 1 o'clock in the morning. Fact 2. The brief drop-off at the end of the street was not recorded by any camera that constantly films this section. Fact 3. The 3 synchronously deny the quarry, although in the message on Alara's phone, The invitation, "Let's meet at the quarry," was clearly formulated. This means their shared story is not about the night, but about how they want that night to appear on paper. The pressure is not artificially increased. It is already sufficient. The picture assembled from smooth sentences collapses at a single silent rectangle of black asphalt. At this point, the investigation gains the right to dig deeper, not because of rumors or antipathy towards the teenagers, but because their perfect alibi does not stand up to the objective image of the street. And when a wall collapses, what lies behind it becomes visible. From the conversation with the three, some recurring details remain that can still be checked today. When they arrived at Leo's, if they were even there. Which neighbor saw his grey sedan near his house during that period? How long the light burned in the garage? Whose phones received notifications at that time? And did they even receive them if the youngsters are sure they immediately turned on the console? All this is not sophisticated technique, but simple steps that separate a pure memory from a well-thought-out version. The concluding point of this block sounds simple and harsh, without beautiful turns. The joint statements of Leo, Chloe, and Marcus are a lie. Perhaps not completely, but in the part where they promised a drop-off at the end of the street and a quick turn. The recording of the cameras on that street does not show their car at the right time. This means the night drove in another direction, to where the three had agreed to remain silent. From here, a comprehensible step remains on the route. Since the false alibi is destroyed, what can speak more strongly than all words is next: the grey sedan itself. Its interior, its floor mats, its trunk, and the small road traces that cling to the car even after the fastest night. It is precisely there that the investigation will now turn, because the short, smooth story of the three no longer holds up, and on the northern edge of the town, there is a place where the earth remembers better than people. From the empty camera footage on Vance Street, the investigation turned to people. And here, the trio spoke not with words, but with actions. At first glance, minor details, insignificant on their own. Together, they formed a disturbing pattern. Everything that could be wiped, hidden, or switched off was hastily wiped, hidden, and switched off. Leo was the first to attract attention. On the morning of October 16th, his limousine is seen at a detailing bay. Not a quick wash, but a full chemical cleaning of the interior and trunk. Foam, steam, removal of mats, treatment of plastics, the smell of citrus cleaner lingering in the car for another day afterwards. At the counter, a bill for a deep clean. He waits in the lot, pacing, not moving a step. A motive could be invented. Weekend dirt. Preparation for sale. But the timing for such fastidiousness is too close to the night about which the three had already lied. Chloe retreats into the digital shadows. On the evening of the same day, her social media page disappears. No break, no private profile. A deletion. Stories, chats, photos from the last month are gone. For someone who posted every other day, this is an abrupt break. One could call it nervousness or attention fatigue. But in the context of the lie about dropped off and driven away, the gesture seems like an attempt to cover tracks. Marcus freezes. His parents simply say, he barely leaves his room. He reports sick to school, doesn't show up for sports, only answers the phone sporadically. In the evenings, the light in his window burns deep into the night. And this is not a protest or a pose. It is that heavy, immobile fear, where every word seems superfluous. None of these details alone proves guilt. Cars are washed. Accounts are deleted. Teenagers withdraw when their world collapses. But in this story, there is already a proven lie about the end of the road. And there is a too-synchronous syndrome of wiping away, erasing, disappearing, which manifested in all three within 2 days. The inconspicuous surveillance documents exactly that. No secret meetings, no mysterious packages, but the rhythm of actions after that night. Leo scrubs his car down to the plastic. Chloe goes offline. Marcus sinks into silence, as if each, in their own way, reacts to the same fear, that a trace of their shared evening might remain. For an investigator, this is not enough for loud conclusions, but for the next legitimate step. There is a confirmed discrepancy with the cameras. There is behavior that looks like a hasty cleanup. These two foundations lead to a decision: to submit a request for a search of Leo Gray's grey limousine, exactly the car where the last clear minute ends. Exactly there should now lie the answer that cannot be eliminated by foam or steam. The search warrant is signed, and Leo's grey limousine is driven under the lights into a closed garage. It smells of fresh chemicals. The plastic shines like new. Everything according to regulations. Tape, photos from all angles, license plate, mileage, marks on the handles. The forensic technicians work without haste. First the interior, door compartments, the niche under the radio, the space under the seats. Then the trunk, an overall view, a scale ruler, a clean sheet for samples. The car looks as if it came straight from the showroom, and this only increases the tension. If anything remained after the detailing, it will be a crumb, dust, something that adheres deeply and does not disappear with either steam or foam. The first find is at the edge of the trunk opening. A fine strip of reddish dust. It is removed with tape and packed into labeled bags. In the left niche, next to the jack, 2 crumbs of earth, as if someone had bumped the edge of a box and pushed it further. They are secured separately. The plastic is wiped with cotton swabs. A barely visible trace remains on one. In the documents, these are just microparticles of earth-like materials without premature conclusions. But those who live in Port Blossom know such a shade most often clings to shoes on the northern edge where the old quarry lies. Next, the floor mats. The driver's mat is removed, turned over, tapped with the back of a knife. Fine dirt embedded in the felt trickles out. It is collected with a brush into a dish. The passenger's mat is clean, unusually clean, as if it had been washed twice. This is noted in the protocol, and they move on. The back seat appears empty, but the rule is simple. Everything that can be lifted is lifted. The mat is lifted at the edge, and the silence of the garage is broken by a brief metallic sound like a drop on glass. Under the rubber, on the ribbed plastic, lies a small object, caked with dust. It is not grabbed with fingers. First a photo, the angle, the scale, then tweezers. On the forensic technician's palm lies a silver crescent moon, the size of a thumbnail. There is a dark trace on the eyelet, as if a chain had rubbed against the metal for a long time. The pendant seems simple, not the kind one puts in the glove compartment, for luck. Such a thing is worn around the neck every day until it feels like a part of the skin. Next to it, 2 further details are recorded. The first: a thin strip of hair is visible in the gap under the fastening. It is removed with micro tweezers and packaged separately. The second: on the pendant itself, there is a barely visible scratch in the shape of the letter S. Not an embellishment, but a random feature by which close people recognize their property without words. No verbal comments, only the numbers of the bags and signatures. But the atmosphere in the garage changes. Previously it was about dust and fibers. Now an object lies on the table that has an owner and a story. The trunk is closed, the interior covered with foil. The find is already more important than the cleaning. According to procedure, the pendant is photographed, labeled, and placed in a safe. A short line appears in the report. Metal object discovered. Crescent-shaped pendant. secured. This is enough to call this not just a find, but a turning point. In the city, many had seen such a contour around Ilara's neck, a thin chain, a bright arc on her collarbone. Now, that contour lies under the lights, in a bag with a number. This is exhibit number 1. Inconspicuous, light, but heavy in significance. Ilara's pendant was found under the rear floor mat of the car from which, according to the three, she was dropped off at the end of the road. From now on, the chronology is no longer just the words of others. This is followed by verification with the family, the microparticles from the trunk, and the journey north to the land of the same hue, where fine dust stubbornly clings. The family verification proceeds without pathos. A small office, a transparent bag on the table, light from above. The mother does not look at the exhibit number, but at the scratch. "That's hers," she says calmly. The father adds a detail known only at home. She had scratched the crescent with the zipper of her backpack, the scratch resembling the letter S. The pendant, which Ilara never took off, neither during training nor while traveling, returns to the case as a personal, recognizable item, not just metal from the trunk. In parallel, a completely different conversation takes place, without emotions or odors. The bags with dust from the trunk and from the driver's mat lie next to control samples taken at the edge of the northern quarry. The laboratory is not looking for mysterious traces. It compares hue, structure, and composition. The result sounds dry and factual. The microparticles are identical in their composition of minerals and admixtures of red clay found at the abandoned quarry north of Port Blossom. For the locals, it is simply the color of the earth on their sneakers. For the case, a geographical address. Two strands converge almost simultaneously. The family confirms the pendant. The geology points to a spot on the map. And on the same day, that arrives which finally destroys the route to the end of the road. Mobile phone operators transmit the logs. On the evening of October 14th, from 23:15 to 0:30, the phones of Leo, Chloe, and Marcus were in the area of the same cell tower, the one that serves the area of the old quarry and the adjacent turnoff. This is not an approximate vicinity, but a stable connection in one sector, while the city was already sinking into silence. The picture comes together without superfluous words. In the car from which she was dropped off at the house, under the floor mat, lies Ilara's pendant. In the trunk, there is dust the color of the northern embankment, matching the quarry in composition. The phones of the three are located there on the same night where the red clay clings to souls. Their perfect story gets cracks, and in its place, a traceable route emerges. The classmate's house, the road north, the spot at the pit. This is no longer a collection of circumstantial evidence, but a solid framework for the next step. Subpoenas for renewed interrogations are sent to the trio, and a new work location is marked on the map: the quarry and its access roads. From here, the investigation will proceed to where the earth preserves the most stubborn of all evidence and where the night, according to their own phones, lasted longer than they want to admit. The moment the pendant was placed in the bag and the red dust received a number, the names of the three stood next to each point. But objects and diagrams alone are not enough. To advance the story, someone needs to be the first to break from the common line and stop repeating the memorized route. The focus shifts from the evidence to the people. Leo Gray is the type who is used to taking the lead. Straight back, practice directness, short sentences without superfluous words. During breaks, a slight smile, as if the interlocutor is one step too late. He answers confidently, doesn't contradict, but cuts off every attempt to specify the time. I don't remember the minutes. I don't want to speculate. At the words about the quarry, his gaze freezes. In this coldness, there is no confusion, but control. Such a person holds the line to the end and does not think about how their silence sounds. Chloe Davis embodies a different type of resistance. There are no gaps in her speech. Every word is like a button. She doesn't raise her voice, but restricts access. Only through my lawyer. I will answer written questions later. And this is not boasting, but the habit of putting everything around her in its proper place. Her gestures are dry. Her fingers hold the phone, even if it's locked, as if a single touch would bring back her accustomed life. For her, the truth is not important, but the version over which she has control. Marcus Peterson is neither shield nor spear, but the shadow at their side. Huddled, shoulders lowered, gaze fixed on the table. He swallows often and doesn't know what to do with his hands. At the simple request to describe the evening, he takes a breath as if before jumping into water and lapses into an Sentences get stuck, words get mixed up, intonation comes too late. There is no challenge in him, only the heaviness with which teenagers sometimes stand after bad news. Such a person endures as long as strong people are nearby and crumbles when alone. The psychological notes in the file are short, but they suffice for the tactic. The leader stonewalls, the controller shuts down, the follower drowns in his own pause. And then there is what the trio can no longer explain. The pendant under the mat, the clay in the trunk, the phone location in the same sector at the quarry. These three lines strike the common story from different sides and make the common wall fragile. The decision is made without many words. First, they are isolated. They are taken to different rooms. Each has its own table, its own clock on the wall, its own silence. No encounters in the hallway, no glances through glass, no brief, "we stick together." Parents are informed separately. Access is granted on a schedule so that none of the three receives clues through glances. In such stories, silence is not a pause, but a tool, and it is the first thing taken from them. Then the direction of attack is chosen, not against the wall that feigns strength, and not against the lid that is kept shut on principle, but against the door whose hinges are already creaking. Marcus is that door. He is the only one whose reactive movements betray his inner rhythm. A trembling pen, an awkwardly adjusted chair, a slow yes where others say no comment. He will not be broken. He will be separated from the chorus and allowed to hear his own echo. The subpoena for renewed questioning goes specifically to him. The text contains nothing superfluous. Date, time, the obligatory note about accompaniment and rights. In the department, a folder with 3 things is already prepared: a printout of the mobile phone data, a bag of red dust, and a transparent envelope with the crescent moon. This trio will not be laid out on the table for show, but to waste no words on what is already visible. The line he clung to is to meet things that cannot lie. When Marcus arrives, the hallway is silent. No one from his group is in the room. The chair is slightly away from the table. The window is closed. The sound of the air conditioning is even. The door closes softly, without a click. And at that moment, their strategy focuses on one point. The conversation does not begin with accusations or loud formulas, but with what always unnerves teenagers, with things they last touched. The cell tower data, the reddish dust, the silver crescent moon. From this step on, the who becomes more important than the what. The investigation stops arguing with the common version and finds the thread that only needs to be pulled once. From now on, the story will not be told by the leader or the one who dominates the scene, but by the one who is too tired to play the role of friend in the group. The next block begins with Marcus sitting alone with this folder and being asked to tell not the story of others, but his own night. Before Marcus opens his mouth, it's important to understand why this drive happened at all. The answer isn't in the trunk, but in the chats that began long before the evening of October 14th. There are no secret conspiracies there, but what happens all too often in high school? a slow jealousy that has been building up for weeks. At the end of September, Chloe's tone changes. Witty messages to friends turn dry and thorny. She's coming on to Leo, a short message without emojis. A few days later, she needs to stay away. I'm fed up. In early October, it's no longer insinuations, but formulations that hint at a command. After practice, we'll talk to her alone. Against this backdrop, shared photos disappear. Likes on Alara's posts are reduced to 0, and in group chats, Chloe no longer mentions her by name, but replaces it with her. This isn't criminology. It's an everyday cooling that everyone around them feels before it's spoken. In private dialogues, Chloe repeatedly says the same thing. Don't touch my boyfriend. I warned you. She needs to be put in her place. Friends try to smooth things over. Just talk it out. That's silly. But by the middle of the month, the decision has already been made. 2 days before the party, Chloe texts Leo, "Afterwards, we're going alone. We need to settle this." And on the day of the disappearance, around 10 o'clock in the evening, a short, emotionless sequence of words to Alara. "Meet me at the quarry. We need to talk." Exactly that sentence that will later appear on the screen of the found phone. This flashback takes the mystery out of everything. The drive was not a random outing through the night city. It was Chloe's initiative to move the conversation from the loud living room to where no one would disturb them. "Leo, you protect your own," he would drive. "Marcus, you don't abandon your own," he would go along. The destination was chosen not for the romantic view of the water, but for the silence where words would not reach foreign ears. The motive is clear. No predatory plan and no hunt in the dark, but wounded pride. The desire to humiliate and show boundaries. From this moment on, the investigation stops looking for a stranger by the roadside and refocuses on the 3 who got into the limousine. Next is the direct confrontation of this version with what happened at the edge of the pit, and the conversation with the one who is already ready to deviate from his memorized phrase. The conversation to which the pendant and the clay led begins without preamble. Marcus is seated alone. The door closes softly. On the table, a glass of water and a blank form. The investigator does not exert pressure with his voice, but with rhythm. He lays down one item after another like bricks in a wall. First, the printout of the routes. The end of the road is empty, not confirmed by any camera. Marcus nods and says, "I don't remember." Next, the screenshots of the cell towers. Time 23:15 to 0:30, a sector at the quarry. He repeats, "Coincidence." On the table comes the bag with the reddish dust. Next to it, a photo of the trunk. "We didn't." The word chokes. Fingers play with the rim of the glass. The pace quickens. In every no, the previous no echoes, and the pauses grow longer. In the third round of questioning, Marcus looks into a corner, presses his knees together, his lips turn white. He clings to the rehearsed story, but it no longer fits what is before him. The investigator does not argue. He simply cuts off the air from the story, in which there is nothing left to breathe. The last gesture is detached. A sealed, transparent bag is placed on the table. Inside, the silver crescent moon. The mark on the eyelet, the scratch in the shape of the letter S, is visible through the plastic like a fine cut arc. In the interrogation report, a pause appears. 57 seconds. A relay clicks in the air conditioning. Marcus doesn't take water. He doesn't look at the investigator. He only looks at the bag. Then his breath hitches, and a sentence ends their shared version. "I'll show you where she is." From this moment on, the story leaves the rooms with the grey walls and moves to where the night wind reduces voices to whispers, to the northern turnoff and the spot at the quarry, the convoy of vehicles takes the northern turnoff. Headlights glide over the wet gravel. Searchlights cast white patches on the quarry wall. Marcus is driven in front. He is silent and points with his hand. Briefly, without explanations. The spot he chooses looks like an unkempt corner of the area. A shallow depression covered with branches, pieces of old planks, and a loose layer of red earth. From this place, the story is no longer a conjecture but the result of actions. The area is cordoned off with tape. The documentation, overall view, control markers, distances. Forensic technicians work quietly as if rehearsing, layer by layer. First, the debris is removed. A rotting plank, slippery bark, bundles of dry grass. Then the thin top layer of earth, crumbly like the dust on shoe soles. The tools here are simple. Brushes, trowels, bags with labels. Spades are set aside. The depth is shallow. Any roughness could tear what will help with identification. Marcus stands a little apart and does not raise his gaze. The first signal is fabric. A grey edge, a seam at the hem that has absorbed the earth's moisture. Stop. Photo. Glove change. After that, they work more carefully, centimeter by centimeter. Beneath the fabric, a light fragment emerges, as if reflecting the searchlight's light from within. It is not metal from technology and not glass. It is a tiny zipper of a sports jacket pocket. It is not torn out. It is exposed, everything left as it lies. The heavy smell of damp clay and iron rises into the air. No one says an unnecessary word aloud. The work becomes a ritual. One digs, the second photographs, the third dictates time and action into the protocol. The exhumation begins. When the earth finally yields, it becomes clear. Not only was it hidden here, but they were in a hurry and afraid. The branches are scattered indiscriminately, the boards laid haphazardly underneath a torn layer of construction debris. Every additional centimeter confirms the same thing. Everything happened quickly, loudly, and with a panicked desire to finish it. The moment of discovery comes without screams. Beneath the earth appears the line of a shoulder under fabric, then a sleeve, a thin elastic band at the cuff. As much as exposed as regulation requires, no more. To the left, a hair tie is found, stuck in a clump of earth. A little further off, a keycard for the gym with the school logo. This is enough to ask the forensic doctor to the edge of the pit and make a preliminary note. The name is not spoken, but it is heard in every movement. The recovery proceeds slowly. A bag, a stretcher, a dark cloth that is not looked under. In the square, the word that pains the ear is not spoken. It is replaced by the dry finder. Preliminary on-site examination establishes features that match the descriptions. The chain around the neck is missing, and this makes the crescent moon found during the day even heavier. The photographer takes the last timestamp. The forensic doctor briefly notes, identity provisionally confirmed. Ilara Vance. The tape remains until morning. The area is sealed. The access roads to the cliff are guarded. The cars turn off their engines almost simultaneously and the silence of the quarry returns, but now as a backdrop for a different act. This is no longer a place for teenage gatherings, but a crime scene where every speck of dust carries weight. The undeniable has been found, and from this point, the story enters its cold phase. The investigation of causes, times, and procedures, while in the city, the procedural decisions regarding the trio with whom Ilara drove away that night are being prepared. The confession is read without emotion, like a recording that cannot be rewound. The first lines sound astonishingly simple, almost mundane, and thus colder. We didn't go for fun. We had to talk, Chloe said. Better where it's quiet. The story, which began as ordinary jealousy, unexpectedly transforms into a straight path to the edge of the pit. Then follow Marcus's short, dry sentences. We went out, the three of us with Ilara. It was dark in the square, only our headlights. Chloe started first, said Ilara was coming on to Leo, that everyone would notice. Ilara replied that wasn't true and asked them to leave her alone. Voices grow louder. Footsteps approach the edge. Leo stepped between them, said, "Stop it." Ilara pushed her hand off her shoulder. He pushed back. No throws or sophisticated grabs, just a shove, a misstep backward, the loose edge, and the body plunges onto a low ledge. Below, trash and sand. She didn't scream. She fell, hit, lay still. At that moment, the youthful audacity runs out of energy. We went down. Chloe shook her arm. Leo felt her wrist and said, "No pulse. We're going to jail. We have to hide her." Marcus's voice broke at exactly that sentence. After that, panic, in which you only hear the dull, faster, planks from old pallets, branches, loose earth they grab with their hands. No shovels, everything underfoot. We covered her from above, as best we could. Leo said, "No one must find her." Chloe carried branches. Marcus scraped together the crumbly earth. I thought I heard a rustling. Leo said, "You imagined it." They returned to the car and drove away. We agreed to keep quiet, said we'd dropped her off at her house. In the confession, there are no grand words or dramatic gestures, only the small mechanics of fear. The phones in our pockets vibrated. We didn't answer. Our hands smelled of earth. We threw a board in the trunk. We threw it away later. Marcus says this evenly, as if he had said every word to himself hundreds of times before the office. But the protocol is not just his voice. Next to it lies the forensic doctor's report, and it sounds like a judgment on everything they tried to justify. The injuries from the fall, not life-threatening. No fractures incompatible with life. The most important line, the cause of death. Asphyxia. Particles of earth and fine sand were found in the airways and lungs. This means only one thing. When the teenagers covered the pit with branches and loose earth, Ilara was still breathing. She did not die from the fall. Her life ended under the layer of that red dust, which was later found on the car floor mats. It is precisely here that the story finally ceases to be a mystery of disappearance and becomes a chain of decisions for which they must be held accountable. Marcus signs the confession. A precise sequence appears in the file. Argument at the edge. Shove. Fall. Panic. Attempt to conceal. Departure. Everything fits together. The pendant under the mat, the earth in the trunk, the cell tower logs at the quarry. Ahead of them lie the formal steps that are unavoidable in such cases. Arrests, the formulation of charges, and a trial in which every word from this confession will form the basis of the verdict. After Marcus's confession, all that remains is to bring the night into a straight line, without emotion, with minutes and places. This line begins at the door of a classmate's house and ends with the smoke over a barrel at Leo's garage. 23:05. Departure from the party. The grey limousine turns from the gate. The message, "Meet me at the quarry. We need to talk," has already been sent. Ilara is in the car with Chloe, Leo, and Marcus. 23:12 to 23:15. Arrival at the northern edge. The headlights glide over the quarry wall. The car stops in the clearing. The phones of the three are picked up by the cell tower in the quarry sector. 23:20 to 23:25. The conversation moves to the edge. The words are short and harsh. Chloe's accusation, Ilara's attempt to end the topic. Leo steps between them. An abrupt movement, a shove. The loose edge, a low rock ledge, the impact on a pile of trash and sand. Silence. 23:26 to 23:35. Panic. They descend. Check the wrist. No pulse, Leo blurts out. The decision is made in the dark. We're going to jail. We have to hide her. Everything at hand is used. Branches, old planks, crumbling earth. Hands, sleeves, shoes, all covered in red dust. 23:36 to 23:45. The covering. Clumsy, fast movements, the desire to finish it at all costs. In the pit, the jacket, a hair tie, the gym key card remain. On top, branches thrown haphazardly. The chain around the neck is gone. 23:46 to 0:100. Return to the car. A board flies into the trunk. The floor mats pick up the same reddish dust that lies at the edge of the clearing. The agreement: we keep silent. We say we dropped her off at the end of her street 010 to 030. Departure from the quarry. The same phones remain in the same sector until they turn towards the city. The road is empty. The windows are slightly open. The smell of earth has settled into the fabric. 035 to 045. Leo's house. In the yard stands a metal barrel. Jackets and gloves are thrown into the fire. The plastic melts. The fabric turns black. The ashes are swept into the gravel. Water from a hose extinguishes the embers. The clothes they worked in are gone. The night ends with the elimination of traces. The morning brings attempts to solidify the version. Dropped her off on her street. Drove to Leo's to play. Later, the detailing of the interior and trunk. Chloe's disappeared account. Marcus's silence behind a locked door. All these details overlay the chronology, but do not erase it. Before us lies not randomness, but a sequence, from the invitation to talk to the argument, from the shove to the fall, from panic to cover-up. Timestamps, objects, protocols, and the confession agree on one thing. After 23:05, Ilara's fate was in the hands of the three, and each made their own choice. The final line of this reconstruction is short and extremely clear. After 045, the trio agrees on a common legend for the police and sticks to it until the first inconsistencies arise. The fact of conspiracy to conceal is proven. The next step is no longer about minutes, but about paragraphs and the degree of responsibility of each individual. The paragraphs and prison sentences were announced on September 10, 2019, in the courtroom. Despite their age, the trio was sentenced as adults due to the gravity of the crime and the deliberate cover-up. The prosecutor took a clear stance. They knew Ilara might still be alive, but they closed the pit and drove away. The defense pleaded panic, the absence of direct intent, and a chain of youthful mistakes. The court heard the parents, the experts, read Marcus's confession, and the report on the earth particles in the airways. The verdict was short and cold. Leo Gray, guilty of murder in the second degree, 20 years imprisonment. Chloe Davis, guilty of manslaughter, 12 years imprisonment. Marcus Peterson, guilty of aiding and abetting and concealment, 5 years probation for full cooperation with investigators. Thus ended the judicial part of the story. After the verdict, the silence everyone was used to did not return to Port Blossom. The court closed the files, but not the consequences. Concrete blocks, a fence, and warning signs were erected at the northern access road to the old quarry. A month later, machines arrived and filled in the dangerous embankments. The teenagers' meeting place became a restricted zone where no one goes in the evenings anymore. Alara's parents founded a scholarship in her name, a scholarship for graduating female students who play volleyball, and small grants for safety projects in district schools. A metal plaque with her data and jersey number was placed in the Port Blossom High gym. Once a year, the team holds a memorial game without music. Only the sound of the ball hitting the parquet floor is heard. The city slowly changed its habits. Parties now end earlier. Parents pick up their children at the door more often. The route, taking a detour, no longer sounds like a normal option. But one thing remained unanswered even after the verdicts came into force. That crucial moment, the seconds at the edge, the instant when the three realized she was still breathing, remained hidden in conflicting statements. This emptiness is filled neither by prison sentences nor by memorial plaques. It simply lives on in the city, along with the name Alara Vance.